The echo of my heels filled the marble hallway of the Jefferson County Courthouse. Each step sounded louder than the last, like the building itself was listening, judging whether I belonged here. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, staining the floor gold, and for a brief second, I pretended it was courage lighting my way. The air smelled of paper, old varnish, and coffee brewed too long ago. People shuffled past me, attorneys with files pressed to their chests, secretaries whispering into phones, a janitor humming to himself. I kept my eyes ahead, clutching the worn leather folder that contained everything. The evidence, the dates, the lies, the truth. I'd heard the jokes for months. You're going to sue them? Good luck with that. They said it like I was a child threatening to call the police over a stolen candy bar. I had smiled then, swallowing my pride. But today, my name was on the docket, printed in bold type. Hannah Lowell versus Brickmont Corporation. When I reached courtroom 3B, I froze for a heartbeat. Through the open doors, I could see the defense table already occupied, 3 men in dark suits and 1 woman tapping her pen like she was timing my steps. Their laughter was light but sharp, echoing just enough for me to know it was about me. I took a deep breath. The folder nearly slipped from my hands. I tightened my grip. Behind me, a gentle voice whispered, "You okay?" It was Eli, my neighbor, the only person who believed me enough to drive me here. He held out a cup of coffee from the courthouse cafe. The lid was cracked, and steam curled through the air between us. "Not really," I said, forcing a small laugh. He smiled. "Then you're doing it right. Nobody's okay in court." Inside, the room was colder than I expected. The fluorescent lights hummed above, the kind of sound that fills silence, just enough to make you uneasy. I chose the plaintiff's table and laid my documents down carefully, aligning the edges with precision, because when everything else feels out of control, straight lines help. I could feel their eyes on me. Brickmont's lead attorney, Gavin Pierce, leaned back in his chair with a smirk that could slice through glass. He had that polished confidence of a man who'd never once been told no. The woman beside him, Dana Coates, their HR director, avoided my gaze but smirked when he did. My stomach turned. Across the aisle sat a handful of spectators, local journalists, a few courthouse regulars, and 1 woman holding a notepad too eagerly. It made me wonder who had tipped them off. I glanced at my phone. A text from my mother blinked on the screen. "Hannah, please don't do this. You'll only embarrass yourself." I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I locked the screen and slipped the phone face down on the table. Eli touched my shoulder once before sitting behind me. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "you already won for showing up." But my heartbeat didn't agree. It thudded hard, a drum of panic under my ribs. The bailiff entered and barked the announcement. "All rise." The chatter faded instantly. Everyone stood. The air shifted, heavier, reverent. Judge Caroline Dorsey walked in, her robe swaying lightly as she took her seat. She looked stern, but not cruel. Her gaze swept across the room, settling briefly on me before moving to the defense table. "Good morning," she said, her voice even but commanding. "Let's begin with case number 43-019, Lowell versus Brickmont Corporation." A ripple of sound, papers rustling, chairs squeaking. Gavin leaned forward, confidence dripping from every word. "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to note that this case has no merit and should be dismissed outright." My throat tightened. Every eye turned to me. Judge Dorsey adjusted her glasses. "And you are?" He smiled. "Gavin Pierce, representing Brickmont Corporation, Your Honor." The judge nodded, then turned to me. "And you, ma'am?" The room went silent. For the first time all morning, my voice didn't tremble. "Hannah Lowell, representing myself." A faint ripple of laughter spread through the defense table. Polite, practiced, cruel. The sound crawled across the courtroom floor, but I didn't flinch. I held the judge's gaze, letting every ounce of fear harden into something sharper. She studied me for a long second, then spoke calmly. "All right, Ms. Lowell. Let's hear your opening statement." I stood. My knees wobbled once, but my voice held steady. "Your Honor," I began. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. And in that moment, before I'd said another word, the laughter stopped. The first time they laughed at me wasn't in a courtroom. It was in the conference room on the 11th floor of Brickmont Corporate, under the same flickering light that buzzed every time the AC kicked in. Back then, I was still an employee, senior operations analyst with a spotless record and a desk full of color-coded spreadsheets. I believed in hard work, fairness, and coffee that could fix anything. That morning, I'd presented my findings to the management team. Missing payments, falsified overtime logs, and manipulated invoices. Hundreds of thousands gone missing under the label miscellaneous disbursements. When I finished my report, I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say thank you. Instead, Gavin Pierce leaned back, smirking just like he did in court. "Hannah," he said smoothly, "you're overreacting. Accounting already verified those numbers." "They didn't," I replied. "I double-checked with finance. The files are incomplete, someone deleted." He cut me off, still smiling. "You're emotional. Maybe you've been working too many hours. Why don't you take the rest of the day off?" Laughter rippled around the room. Quiet, controlled, poisonous. Dana Coates, the HR director, added softly, "We value your dedication, Hannah, but accusations like this, they don't look good on your record." I remember the heat rising up my neck. My face flushed so badly it hurt. I gathered my notes with trembling fingers, pretending not to notice how my co-workers avoided eye contact. When I returned to my cubicle, my inbox was already flooded with new tasks, busy work meant to keep me quiet. No one mentioned the missing funds again. That night, I sat in my small kitchen, staring at the half-eaten pasta cooling on the counter. My daughter, Lydia, peeked over her tablet and frowned. "Mom, why aren't you eating?" I forced a smile. "Just tired, baby." She nodded, going back to her game. But her little voice lingered. "You look sad." I blinked hard, hiding tears behind a sip of water. When I tucked her into bed later, she whispered, "Did you do something wrong at work?" I hesitated.
"No, sweetheart."
I told the truth. She smiled sleepily. "Then they'll say sorry soon. If only life worked like that." The next morning, my ID badge didn't open the office door. It beeped red. I tried again 3 times before the security guard, Mark, looked up apologetically. "Sorry, Hannah. Your access was removed this morning. You might want to talk to HR." I laughed once. A dry, humorless sound.
"Right.
Of course." Upstairs, Dana greeted me with her usual polished calm. "Oh, Hannah. Perfect timing. Have a seat." Her office smelled of citrus cleaner and expensive perfume. The blinds were half closed, letting thin lines of light cut across her desk. She slid a letter toward me. "We've decided to place you on unpaid leave pending investigation." "For what?" She smiled, the kind that meant you already know. "Workplace disruption. Unsubstantiated accusations. You understand, we have to protect the company." My heart pounded. "I reported theft, Dana. You can't just—" "Please," she interrupted, her tone motherly but hollow.
"Take a break.
Clear your head. You're too good an employee to let stress get the best of you." I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded, numb. By the time I walked out, the office had gone quiet. I could feel eyes peeking over cubicle walls, pretending to be busy. One of my closest coworkers, Megan, mouthed, "I'm sorry." But she didn't stand up. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed with a new message from Gavin. "You're making this ugly, Hannah. Be smart and let it go." I stared at the text until my reflection blurred in the screen. For a moment, I thought about deleting everything. My report, the proof, the anger. Maybe if I pretended none of it happened, things would go back to normal. But when I looked up, Lydia's drawing hung from the rearview mirror. 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, labeled me and Mom. I took a deep breath. The cold air burned my lungs. No, I couldn't let it go. Still, that night, when I made Lydia mac and cheese, I smiled like nothing was wrong. She told me about her spelling test, and I nodded, pretending to listen. When she finally went to bed, I washed dishes until the water turned cold and my hands ached. The sound of dripping echoed through the kitchen. That's how the first real heartbreak feels. Not with shouting or broken plates, but with the quiet sound of water and an unanswered text. Outside, a car drove away from the neighboring lot. Laughter floated faintly through my open window. It was the same kind of laughter that had followed me out of the conference room that morning. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't just cruelty, it was confidence. They knew I wouldn't fight back. Not yet. I used to believe loyalty could fix anything. That if you showed up early, stayed late, and did more than your share, people would notice. That was before Brickmont. When I first started there 8 years ago, the company felt like family. We were a small logistics firm then, late nights, cheap pizza, laughter echoing through hallways painted a dull gray. I was one of the first hires under Gavin Pierce, who was then just a manager with a charming grin and an ego bigger than his ambition. He'd lean over my desk, his cologne thick as honey, and say things like, "You're the backbone of this team, Hannah. Couldn't do it without you." And I believed him. I stayed through mergers, layoffs, and expansions. When they couldn't afford raises, I accepted comp days. When bonuses were late, I covered payroll gaps out of my own savings, just until things stabilize, Gavin had said. Things never stabilized. Every December, they'd throw an extravagant holiday party at the downtown hotel, crystal lights, champagne, and speeches that made us feel important. But the only people who ever got bonuses were the executives. I remember one year after we landed a major contract, I'd stayed 3 nights in the office ensuring the data was perfect. Gavin promised a surprise for my dedication. The surprise was a $25 Starbucks card and a half hug in front of everyone. The same week he drove in with a new Tesla. I told myself it didn't matter. Money wasn't everything. Respect was. But respect is the first thing they take when they know you won't fight back. There were smaller things too, comments passed off as jokes. "Of course, Hannah will handle it. She has no life outside work. You're like a sister to us," Gavin would say when I asked about promotions. "And you don't promote family. You protect them." He said it with a wink. I laughed because that's what you do when you're tired of being the punchline. Then came the overtime scandal. Brickmont began billing clients for after-hours work that never happened. We, meaning I, were told to log 60-hour weeks, but only 40 were paid. "It's standard industry practice," Gavin said. "We all do it." I remember sitting at my desk late one night, the building empty except for the hum of the vending machine. My monitor glowed against the darkness. I scrolled through spreadsheets, watching the company's profits climb, on paper built from my exhaustion. That's when I decided to keep copies. I saved everything: emails, receipts, timesheets. I didn't plan to use them, not yet. It was just instinct. 2 months later, I discovered a report listing my name under false expense reimbursements. Apparently, I'd been reimbursed for $5,000 I never received. When I confronted Dana, she smiled tightly. "Just a clerical error. Don't worry about it." But the next pay period, my hours were cut. My team was reassigned. I was being erased one spreadsheet at a time. Then came the day everything broke. It was a Friday morning, early spring. The air outside smelled of rain. I came in to find the break room crowded around Gavin's phone. He was showing a meme someone had made, my face photoshopped onto a crying baby, with a caption, "Whistleblower wannabe." The laughter was deafening. I stood in the doorway, frozen. Someone noticed me and nudged Gavin. His grin faltered for half a second before returning, smooth and confident. "It's just a joke, Hannah," he said. "Don't be so sensitive." I turned and walked out before they could see the tears. That weekend, I couldn't sleep. Lydia was at her friend's house, and the silence of the apartment pressed in like a weight. I poured myself a glass of wine, then another, then sat at the kitchen table surrounded by my saved documents, proof of every lie, every theft, every insult disguised as policy. I thought about deleting it all, about moving on. But then my phone buzzed with a message from Megan, my old coworker. "They're saying you're unstable, Hannah. They told people you threatened Gavin." My blood went cold. I hadn't said a word to him since that morning. But in a company where perception meant truth, I was already guilty. I stared at the folders scattered across the table. Every file had a story. Every file was a wound. I realized then that I had never been part of their family. I was their cover, their scapegoat, their silent accountant of sins. By Sunday night, I created a backup drive with all the evidence and placed it in Lydia's old lunchbox labeled peanut-free. I hid it in the freezer under bags of frozen peas. The next day, I went to work like nothing had happened. Gavin greeted me in the hallway with a fake smile. "You okay, Hannah?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Perfectly fine." He chuckled.
Good.
"We wouldn't want any drama." I smiled back. "Don't worry. The only drama left will be in court." He didn't laugh that time, but I did. For a moment, quietly, to myself. Because for the first time, I knew the power of truth wasn't in shouting, it was in waiting for the right stage. And soon, they'd given me one. It took them less than 3 weeks to make their next move. I'd been home, trying to piece my life together, applying for temp jobs, updating my resume, pretending to Lydia that I was just on break. She was too young to understand what unpaid leave really meant. She thought I was lucky. But luck doesn't come in pink envelopes. The notice arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, slipped under my apartment door like something ashamed to be seen. The envelope bore Brickmont's logo, embossed in silver ink. For a second, my heart leapt. Maybe they were reinstating me. Maybe someone had seen reason. But when I opened it, I froze. It wasn't an apology. It was an invoice. Outstanding balance due. $18,472. For violation of non-disclosure agreement and reputational damages. I stared at the words until they blurred. My hands shook so hard I dropped the paper. They weren't content with silencing me. They wanted to ruin me. At first I laughed. A broken, bitter sound. I thought it was a prank. But the second page was signed by Gavin Pierce himself. And at the bottom, a line in bold. Failure to remit payment within 30 days may result in legal escalation. I sank into a chair, the walls closing in around me. Lydia was coloring on the floor beside me, humming softly, her little voice full of a peace I no longer understood. "Mom," she said, "why are you crying?" I hadn't realized I was. I folded the letter and slipped it under a stack of bills. "Just something silly from work," I murmured. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every laugh, every smirk, every whispered conversation I'd overheard. I kept seeing Gavin's confident grin, the way he leaned back when he lied, like truth was beneath him. By midnight, I found myself pacing the living room, the floor creaking with each turn. Rain pattered against the window, steady and merciless. I opened my laptop and searched how to file a lawsuit without a lawyer. The internet laughed first. Endless warnings, disclaimers, and blog posts explaining how impossible it was. "Corporations have entire legal teams," one article said. "You'll get crushed." But as I scrolled, I stumbled across a government site for pro se litigants, people who represented themselves. It wasn't glamorous. It was slow, full of legal jargon and tedious forms. But it was possible. And that was all I needed to know. The next morning, I dropped Lydia at school, promising her pancakes for dinner. Then I drove to the courthouse downtown, my car's check engine light blinking like it knew this trip would change everything. Inside, the clerk behind the counter didn't even blink when I said, "I'd like to file a civil suit." She slid a stack of forms toward me. "Against whom?" "Brickmont Corporation." Her eyebrows twitched. "You have representation?" "Just me." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good for you." Those words stuck. Good for you. No one at Brickmont had ever said that unless it came with a smirk. I spent the next 2 weeks buried in paperwork, learning legal phrases like cause of action and breach of contract. My kitchen table turned into a battlefield of binders, sticky notes, and coffee rings. Every night after Lydia went to sleep, I highlighted, printed, stapled, and filed. There were moments of doubt, when my head throbbed and my savings dwindled, but I kept going. Because if I stopped, their laughter would win. Then one morning, As I reviewed my paperwork for the 5th time, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Dana Coates. "We're aware of your recent actions. Pursuing this further will destroy your reputation. Please reconsider before it's too late." I read it twice, then hit print. That was the moment it stopped being fear. It became fury. I tucked the letter into my evidence folder and whispered, "You'll regret sending that." When I finally mailed my filing packet to the court clerk, my hands were steady. The post office smelled of ink and dust and quiet defiance. I remember the sound the envelope made as it slid into the outgoing bin, soft, final, like a match being struck. By the time I walked out into the sunlight, I wasn't the same woman who'd once cried in her car. The air felt different, thinner, easier to breathe. That night, Lydia and I sat on the floor eating pancakes for dinner. She giggled when syrup dripped down her chin. I laughed too, really laughed, for the first time in months. "Mom," she said between bites, "you look happy." I brushed her hair from her eyes. "I think I am." Because deep down, I knew what came next wasn't just a lawsuit. It was the start of my rebellion. I didn't expect the lawsuit to move mountains, at least not right away. But the moment my filing went public, the tremors began. It started small. An email here, a phone call there. Former employees of Brickmont reaching out from ghost accounts, whispering words like, "Thank you," and "Be careful." Apparently, I wasn't the first to be thrown under the bus.
Just the first to fight back.
A woman named Renee Halford reached out first, a quiet, meticulous accountant who'd left the company 2 years before me. We met at a diner off Route 67, the kind of place where the coffee tasted like rust, but the booths had seen 100 confessions. She slid into the booth across from me, eyes darting toward the windows. "You really filed against them?" "I did." "God, I wish I had your guts." I smiled faintly. Guts or desperation? Hard to tell the difference anymore. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and pushed it across the table. "This might help. It's a copy of their internal audit reports. They've been shifting pension funds for years, hiding bonuses under consulting fees." I tried to speak up once. They called it a data misinterpretation. Then they cut my position. I blinked. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because someone has to burn it all down." The drive felt heavy in my hand, heavier than evidence, heavier than fear. That night, I stayed up late again, reading every file Renee had given me. It was worse than I'd imagined. Fake invoices, forged signatures, even offshore accounts tied to Gavin's name. For the first time, I realized my firing wasn't personal, it was strategic. I'd gotten too close. The next day, I printed the juiciest parts and included them in my case file. But I also made copies, lots of them. Some went into a safety deposit box. Some went to a friend who worked at the Post-Ledger, a local paper with a taste for corporate scandals. The storm was building, and I wasn't about to stand under it unprepared. By week 3, Brickmont's lawyers had noticed. A man named Curtis Vale called me one morning, smooth voice, the kind that probably billed by the minute.
"Ms. Harlow," he said.
"I represent Brickmont. Let's not drag this out in court. Our client is willing to offer settlement." "How generous." "You'll withdraw your claim and sign a confidentiality renewal. In exchange, we'll forgive the $18,000 and offer an additional, let's say, $25,000. I laughed out loud. "You want to buy my silence again?" "It's not about silence, Ms. Harlow. It's about closure." "Then I'll close this case in court." He paused, the tone dropping an octave. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. But at least it'll be my mistake this time." I hung up before he could respond. My hands trembled, not from fear, but adrenaline. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being cornered. I was the one drawing the line. A few days later, the local paper ran a headline that made my stomach twist and my pulse race. "Whistleblower alleges corporate fraud at Brickmont Corp. Lawsuit filed by former employee." It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. The article mentioned a female project manager and potential misuse of pension funds. My inbox exploded within hours, messages from strangers, reporters, even other victims. And then, the phone call that nearly brought me to my knees. "Charlotte? It's Gavin." I froze. His voice, calm, smug, familiar, filled the room. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said softly. "You don't know how deep this goes." "I know enough," I said. He chuckled. "You really think anyone's going to believe you? You're one woman. I've got a company behind me. Not for long." There was a pause. Then he said almost tenderly, "You always did have potential. Shame it's wasted on bitterness." And then click. The dial tone echoed through the room, long after I'd hung up. But instead of fear, something colder settled over me. Resolve. I went to the courthouse again the next morning and filed a motion to expand my claim to include retaliation and defamation. The clerk gave me a small smile when she stamped it. "Back again," she said, "until they stop breathing down my neck." That weekend, I took Lydia to the park. We fed ducks, played tag, and for once, I didn't check my phone every 5 minutes. She laughed so hard she fell into the grass, sunlight catching her hair. I realized then, this fight wasn't just mine. It was for her, for the version of me I wanted her to see someday. Someone who didn't break. Someone who fought back. When we got home, I tucked her into bed, then opened my laptop. There were already new messages in my inbox, some supportive, others threatening. But one stood out. "If you ever need someone to testify, I'm in. Former HR manager, Brickmont." I smiled. The rebellion was spreading. And somewhere in the quiet hum of my apartment, I finally believed it. They had no idea what kind of storm they'd just unleashed. When you stand up to people who've built their lives on manipulation, they don't go quietly. The first hit came disguised as kindness. Gavin emailed me a short, almost polite message. "We're both adults, Charlotte. Let's find a way to resolve this without ruining your career." No apology. No accountability. Just threat wrapped in civility. Then came the smear campaign. Overnight, my LinkedIn was flooded with anonymous comments, whispers about poor performance, instability, and personal issues. Someone even sent emails to my new employer claiming I'd been let go for misconduct. The HR manager, Tom Ellison, called me in the next morning. He looked uneasy, scratching his beard. "Charlotte, I know this is uncomfortable, but corporate received complaints about your prior employment. I know exactly where they're coming from." He nodded. "We checked. None of it lines up. Still, we have to file an internal note." For a second, I felt the old panic rise, that crawling sense of powerlessness I used to swallow whole. But then I caught my reflection in the glass door behind him. Straight back. Steady eyes. I wasn't the same woman who used to beg for understanding. "File your note," I said softly. "I'll file my truth." He smiled, the kind of smile that said good for you without words. 2 days later, things escalated. It was a Thursday evening. I just put Lydia to bed when I heard the pounding on my front door, sharp, insistent, angry. I froze, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Charlotte Harlow, open up." It wasn't police. It was Gavin's voice. I stepped closer to the door, but didn't unlock it. "What do you want?" "To talk. You lost that right months ago." He slammed his hand against the wood. "You're destroying my reputation." "No," I said evenly. "You're just watching it fall apart without me holding it up." Silence. Then his voice dropped low. "You think the truth will save you? Judges don't care about truth. They care about power." I almost laughed. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them what power looks like. He cursed under his breath, the sound fading as he stormed down the steps. A moment later, headlights cut across my window, then darkness. The next morning, I reported the incident to the police. The responding officer, Officer Dana Wells, listened quietly, taking notes as Lydia clung to my leg. "He didn't hurt you?"
"No."
"Any property damage?" "Just my door frame." She nodded. "I'll file a harassment report. If he shows up again, call 911. Do not open the door." Before she left, she crouched down to Lydia's height. "Hey, kiddo. Your mom's pretty brave, huh?" Lydia nodded, eyes wide. "She's like a lawyer superhero." The officer chuckled. "That's one way to put it." When the door closed, I finally exhaled. That night, as I sat alone on the couch, exhaustion pressing behind my eyes, a message pinged on my phone. It was from my lawyer, Marla Jennings, a fierce woman in her 40s who believed in calm strategy over chaos. They're rattled. We have a hearing date. Judge Peterson will review your evidence next week. And, Charlotte, this might actually turn in your favor. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of fear, but because it was finally real. Lydia came padding out in her pajamas. Mom, why are you smiling? I opened my arms, and she crawled into my lap. Because, I said, sometimes when people tell you to stay quiet, the best thing you can do is speak louder. She rested her head against my chest. Are you gonna win? I kissed her hair. We already are. The hearing day came faster than expected. The courtroom was cold, its silence thick with judgment and perfume. Gavin sat at the defendant's table, sleek suit, smug grin intact. When the judge, Honorable Miriam Peterson, called my name, I stood. Hands steady, voice calm. Marla led with the evidence. The doctored invoices, the pension accounts, Renee's files. Each slide made the defense squirm harder. Then, Judge Peterson leaned forward. Ms. Harlow, may I ask, why pursue this alone? Why not settle? I looked her in the eye. Because silence is how they win. The room went still. Even Gavin didn't move. She nodded slowly, then turned to the defense. Mr. Vale, your client's financial records appear troubling. And that was the first crack. By the time the gavel came down, the court had ordered a full audit of Brickmont Corporation. My case wasn't over, but it was officially public. Reporters waited outside like vultures, flashes popping as I stepped into the sunlight. Ms. Harlow, any comment? Someone shouted. I met their gaze. Only this. The truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. I didn't look back. That night, I tucked Lydia into bed again, and she whispered, half asleep, Mom, you're safe now, right? I hesitated, then smiled. Getting there. Outside, the rain started. Soft, rhythmic, cleansing. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. I felt seen. The Monday after the hearing, I woke to sunlight instead of anxiety. No vibrating phone, no dread pressing on my chest. Just morning light spilling through thin curtains, soft and gold, like forgiveness. For the first time in what felt like forever, I brewed coffee without checking my email first. Lydia sat at the kitchen table, coloring. Can I draw our new house? She asked. I smiled. This is our house. She shook her head. No, I mean the one that doesn't feel scared. Her words hit harder than I expected. Kids always see the truth before adults do. So I told her, sure, sweetheart. Draw it exactly how you want it to feel. She used every crayon she owned, yellow windows, pink sky, green hearts on the door. That was the moment I decided we'd rebuild, not just legally, but emotionally. Support began trickling in like sunlight through cracks. Renee dropped by one evening with a box of homemade banana bread. You probably haven't had time to breathe, let alone bake, she said, setting it on the counter. I don't even remember the last time I turned on my oven, I admitted. She smiled. Then let's fix that. We ate in silence at first, then laughed over memories of Brickmont's chaos. The broken printer, the endless coffee shortages, the Friday meetings that could have been emails. By the time she left, my apartment smelled like sugar and cinnamon. The next wave of kindness came from unexpected places, my neighbors. One afternoon, I opened the door to find Mrs. Callahan, the elderly woman from next door, holding a grocery bag. I heard about your case, dear, she said softly. Don't you dare give up now. Inside the bag were small comforts, bread, soup cans, a note scrawled in looping handwriting. You've got a whole building behind you. I cried over that one. Not the big, cinematic kind, just quiet tears of relief, dripping into the soup as it simmered. At work, things changed too. Tom, my HR manager, stopped by my desk with a small envelope. Inside was a gift card to a local bookstore and a note. 4 new beginnings and brave stories. I didn't realize until that moment how much I'd missed simple gestures. Genuine ones. Ones that didn't demand repayment or submission. Financially, things were still tight. The settlement hadn't come through yet, and legal fees were stacking like uninvited guests. But I started managing things differently. I built a spreadsheet, clear columns, simple math. Rent, food, savings, Lydia's World Fund. For the first time, the numbers didn't look hopeless. I even noticed a small surplus, enough to buy a second-hand bike for Lydia, the kind with purple tassels she'd been begging for. When she rode it for the first time down our quiet street, her laughter echoed like music. Neighbors peeked from porches, waving. Mrs. Callahan clapped. Even the air felt lighter. That evening, as I folded laundry, my phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't dread. It was an email from a journalist at the Post-Ledger. Charlotte, the investigation you triggered has exposed wider fraud across multiple branches. We'd like to interview you for a follow-up story, not as a victim, but as a whistleblower hero. I read it twice before whispering, "Hero? Me?" Lydia looked up from her drawing. "You are one." I told Officer Wells you were. Her certainty made me laugh through my tears. By the end of the week, our home felt different. Not bigger, just lighter. The walls no longer held the echo of fear, only the quiet hum of healing. I started painting again, something I'd stopped doing years ago. Nothing fancy, just landscapes, soft blues and greens. Lydia painted beside me, her version brighter, messier, happier. One night, as we cleaned our brushes, she said, "It's like the colors came back." I nodded.
Yeah.
They did. Before bed, I sat by the window, watching the city glow beneath a half moon. I thought about all the people who'd stepped in, the ones who gave, listened, believed. And it hit me that family doesn't always share your last name. Sometimes they share your courage. I wrote that line down in my journal. Underneath, I added one more. For once, the house feels bigger. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let sleep come easy for the first time in years. Spring arrived early that year. The city streets, once gray and tired, suddenly bloomed with dogwood trees and pink skies. I didn't realize how much I'd missed the sound of life. Birds, laughter, the hum of hope returning. It had been 7 months since the first hearing. The fraud investigation against Brickmont Corp had exploded far beyond anything I'd imagined. Federal auditors were now involved. Gavin was off the grid, his lawyers scrambling to contain the fallout. And me? I was finally breathing. Mornings had a rhythm now, gentle, predictable, mine. I'd wake up before Lydia, brew coffee, and sit by the window with my sketchbook. Some days I wrote. Some days I painted. Always something quiet, something new. Lydia would join me with her cereal bowl and say, "You're doing your serious face again." "That's my peaceful face," I'd say. Our small apartment, once filled with tension, now buzzed with warmth. Plants on the sill, art supplies on the table, a bike helmet hanging proudly by the door. I even started freelancing for small design firms, choosing projects I cared about instead of those that drained me. No one called me too emotional anymore. No one raised their voice to remind me of my place. Because this time I defined it myself. Every Tuesday, Renee and I met for coffee. She was helping me navigate the logistics of testifying in the federal case. "They're going to call you again," she warned one morning. "The defense will try to twist it. Don't let them." "I won't," I said, stirring my coffee slowly. "They can't make me small again." She smiled. "You sound like someone who's already won." Maybe I had. One Saturday afternoon, as Lydia rode her purple bike up and down the street, a familiar car stopped across the curb.
Gavin.
My stomach clenched, not in fear this time, but clarity. He stepped out, still dressed like the executive he used to be, but thinner, tired. "I just wanted to talk," he said quietly. I kept my distance. "We have nothing left to discuss." He sighed, glancing toward Lydia. "You really did it. You turned them against me." I shook my head. "You did that yourself. I just stopped covering for you." For a moment, something like regret flickered in his eyes. "You were always smarter than I gave you credit for." "I was always strong enough," I corrected. He nodded once, then got back in his car. I watched him drive away, not with anger, but with the clean detachment that comes when a wound finally scars over. Lydia rode up beside me, breathless. Who was that? No one we need to worry about anymore. She grinned. Good. By summer, life had turned gentle again. I moved us into a small house with a fenced yard. Not big, not fancy, but safe. We painted the walls ourselves, soft mint in the kitchen, pale gray in the bedrooms. Lydia insisted her room be yellow. It's the color of happy, she said. And she was right. I framed one of her drawings, the new house she'd imagined months ago, and hung it by the front door. Her crayon hearts matched perfectly with the new place. We hosted our first real dinner there. Renee, Mrs. Callahan, Officer Wells, even Tom from work. Everyone brought something. Laughter spilled through the rooms like music. At one point, Renee raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. I smiled. To choosing peace. After everyone left, I stood outside beneath the string lights we'd hung on the porch. Lydia danced barefoot in the grass, fireflies catching in her hair. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, terrified, silenced, begging to be believed. Now, I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I'd built a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval, just honesty, effort, and love. The night air was soft. The stars felt closer. And as Lydia laughed into the sky, I whispered a quiet thank you to the judge who listened, the neighbor who cared, the friends who stayed, and the strength I almost forgot I had. Freedom didn't look like victory banners or courtroom applause. It looked like this: a child's laughter, a calm night, a home that finally felt like one. 1 year later, the courthouse looked different that morning, brighter somehow. Or maybe I was the one who'd changed. Lydia held my hand as we climbed the steps together. She was taller now, her hair longer, her confidence unshakable. Is it weird coming back here? She asked. A little, I said. But sometimes the places that broke us deserve to see how we healed. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon cleaner, the same as before. But this time, there was no fear pressing down on me. We weren't here for trial. We were here for closure. Judge Peterson had finalized the audit months ago. Brickmont's board had folded. Gavin had pled no contest to financial misconduct and falsifying records. He'd lost everything: the job, the company, even the reputation he'd once weaponized. And I'd been granted full restitution, a settlement big enough to erase every debt and start fresh. But the real victory wasn't in the check. It was in the silence that followed, the peace I hadn't realized I'd been chasing my whole life. After the brief formalities, I signed the last document and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. Renee was waiting by the sidewalk, holding 2 coffees. You did it, she said, grinning. We did it, I corrected. She handed me 1 cup. So, what now?
Now.
I looked at the sky, pale blue and open. Now I live. Our life had transformed in quiet, steady ways. We still lived in the little mint green house, but it no longer felt temporary. It was ours. Lydia had started middle school, joining the art club. She'd inherited my stubbornness and my heart for fairness. I told my teacher about your case, she said one night over dinner. She said you're brave. I smiled. Bravery's just fear that learned how to stand still. She nodded like she understood more than she should. Maybe she did. That December, I hosted a holiday dinner, not out of obligation but gratitude. Renee brought pie. Officer Wells dropped off a toy police badge for Lydia, and Mrs. Callahan, now a little slower on her feet, arrived with her famous cranberry bread. We filled the table with laughter and stories. At one point, someone mentioned Brickmont, and for the first time, it didn't sting. It felt distant, like a book I'd finished reading long ago. After everyone left, Lydia and I sat by the fireplace, wrapping gifts. She asked quietly, "Do you still think about him?"
Gavin.
I stared at the flames for a moment.
Sometimes.
But only as a reminder. Of what? That I can survive anything. She smiled softly. You already did. I hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, wildflowers, and soap. "Yeah," I whispered. We both did. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I opened my old journal, the one I'd kept through the chaos. Most of the pages were filled with pain, anger, confusion. But I turned to the last page and wrote one final entry. They laughed when I said I'd sue. They stopped laughing when the judge read my name. And that's when I learned, sometimes the quietest voice carries the loudest truth. I closed the journal, tied it with a ribbon, and tucked it into a drawer. Outside, snow had started to fall, light, gentle, forgiving. I stood by the window, watching the flakes land softly on the world I'd rebuilt. And for the first time, I whispered a single word that summed it all up. Home.